Welcome to the All Things Wildfire podcast, where we delve into the latest trends and hot topics in protecting properties against wildfire. So sit back, relax, and join us as we arm you against disaster.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on another episode of All Things Wildfire. Today, I have with me Mr. Simon Weibel with Burnbot. And Burnbot is a Silicon Valley tech company that jumped into trying to resolve and solve this wildfire problem, or at least a piece of the puzzle. And Simon and I met, I don't know, probably a couple of years ago, huh, Simon? We were just chatting it up, and our paths crossed, and we had some common things that we were talking about.
Yep, that's back when we were just a baby company, just starting out. So
yeah. So Simon, tell me how did this idea start? And because I'm interested in what you got tech jumping into the wildfire problem, and I know a lot of tech has jumped in from digital imagery and things like that, which is smart. How did your company get founded? What was the idea behind it? And what's the progress you guys have been making in the last couple of years?
Yeah, so my role in this all started, I was working for Drone Amplified, the company that does the aerial ignition drones. Probably seen them on wildfires. They're kind of starting to take hold. And the current founder or co-founder, Anna-Cool, who's our CEO, had reached out to Drone Amplified, and he was trying to treat some land out in Grass Valley and do a burn, and just running into roadblocks. And he was interested in using our system, or Drone Amplified system, the Ignis, to do some aerial ignition out there. And so, we met and kind of hit it off, and we just kept running into roadblocks on getting this treatment done. Anna-Cool, with his co-founder, who's now our CTO, Waleed Haddad, saw that there has to be some sort of solution to help get this done.
Nice.
And that's sort of where Leah and Anna-Cool came up with this idea for Burnbot. And at the time, they were, playing around with the idea and had sort of what we now call the mini Burnbot, which was the prototype. And so they kind of pitched me the idea, and it sounded interesting. And one thing led to another, and it started to steamroll. I saw, the mini work. It was a small system, kind of tinker-toyed together. It's the sort of cliche Silicon Valley story where they were building it in Anna-Cool's garage. And, I was kind of starting to work with other tech companies and getting kind of interested in this new fire tech space. And I came out and saw that it worked. We burned a bunch of pine needles, and the basic science was there, and I said, let's go. So we jumped in, but one part of that was developing this system, but as we all know, this problem is way bigger than one tool can handle.
Absolutely.
And that's where we started looking at what other solutions do we need to add in with this. And that's where Burnbot is a tech development company, but we're also an operations company. So we develop the technology, but we also field it. And one of the things that stood out to me with Burnbot is they were reaching out to fire practitioners to help them develop this technology. And so it was really a practitioner up approach to technology development rather than a technology down approach. So they brought me on board to be the head of operations and sort of help build out how to field this machine, and how to make a machine that works with operations that are currently going, and to build out our operational side, which we now have.
Now, Simon, let me for the listeners, why don't you describe what the Burnbot is, what it does? And so for those that are watching on YouTube, you're going to be able to see these clips as to seeing the machine in action. But give us an idea of what this does in its regarding prescribed fire, right? on what typically firefighters are doing to manage dead vegetation to minimize ignition, right?
That's right. Yeah. So basically, the goal of the Burnbot is to be able to burn in areas you traditionally wouldn't. Around critical infrastructure, close to homes, along roadways, and to do so in a safe manner that allows us to, burn on non-burn days, burn in flashy fuels. And so what the system is it's a burn chamber that moves over the ground. Within it, we have a series of high temperature torches. And on top are two high powered fans. And what that does is around the base of this burn chamber, it creates an air curtain and also powers a really intense fire within the system. The air curtain allows for, a very minimal risk of escape and contains that fire within the chamber. And what that does is it not only burns the fuel, but re-burns the smoke. So what we're getting is extremely reduced emissions. So almost unnoticeable. We've actually been able to get air quality exemptions from most of the AQDs in California. So we can burn in, days where the air quality isn't good enough to burn. We can go out and prep a unit and blackline, because what this system does is as we pass over, it leaves cold, black, burnt ground behind it.
Cold?
Yeah, so we have it.
I'm looking at this, and it looks like a miniature tank is what you're driving and pulling, and everything underneath it as you're going over the dead vegetation is now black. It's burned. So what you're describing is there's a fire inside of this little tank. Yeah. You're burning up the grass and the fuel, and you're minimizing the amount of smoke emissions that come out. It sounds like it's probably been friendlier for the environment.
Yeah. So, the goal is to reduce emissions, because that's one of the things, especially in California after a bad fire season, we're all traumatized to the smoke in the air. And one of the hindrances to prescribed fire is people don't want to see more smoke, after fire season. I mean, none of us do. So what we're able to do is burn on non-burn days and minimize that smoke. And then as we pass over and burn the ground, we have a suppression system with water, and we have these rollers that kind of snuff out the fire, and then a water suppression system that cools it. So I actually bring my dog to my dog comes to a lot of our testing, and he likes to follow right behind the Burnbot. So
that is so cool. All right. So Simon, what let's talk about, some use cases, like who could really benefit. When I say who, I'm like an individual that owns a lot of farmland. That's one person who can benefit. But beyond that, like what, we're talking about the fire service, the forestry service, all these, I can just imagine how this equipment could be used. But when you're talking about, people that live in the WUI, what HOAs, I would imagine, could benefit from something like this, especially if they have dry brush all around the perimeter of those properties.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's different ways traditionally that folks have mitigated that issue. Mowing is one of them. Disking is another. At the scale of this problem, if we were, say, to try and bulldoze all this, I mean, that's a lot of ground disturbance. And so one thing is, this is an ecologically friendly way to treat these fine, flashy fuels around, say, an HOA or along a roadway, And, one of the reasons why we're looking at sort of the urban interface WUI out is there's a lot of findings that, these catastrophic wildfires that do a lot of damage to homes and infrastructure actually start in the urban area and go out into the woods rather than the woods and come in.
Interesting.
So by starting within a community and treating there, we're able to kind of start mitigating those catastrophic fires that we see more and more common in places that you wouldn't you wouldn't think that Hawaii would burn. You wouldn't think that, in 2020, my hometown, Ashland, Talent, and Phoenix, we had the Alameda fire, and it burned through the town without ever, even touching the WUI. It was straight through the urban area, and so by bringing our treatments closer to the community or even in the community, we're able to help mitigate that risk directly.
Got it. Now, you mentioned in our previous talk that you were funded by an insurance company to run a pilot program. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, with our sort of, approach to this, we won a $200K pilot from CSAA to explore different ways that, our technology and our services can help communities at the landscape scale. As we talked about, we sit in these Firewise, meetings and listen to homeowners.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, the problem is, I treat my land, 5 of my neighbors treat their land, 18 of our neighbors don't. So how am I protected? So that what we're looking at exploring is, how does a landscape level treatment, so a fuel break around a community or around a municipality or an HOA, how can that help reduce the risk to individual homes? So how can we treat a entire community and then recognize that risk reduction per the homeowner's insurance policy?
Nice, man. And so, I do think this is something that HOAs would be interested in looking at. Now, let's just say that, you have an HOA that's interested in saying, hey, look, we'd like to look into this or experiment with the possibility of doing this. What's the process of what that looks like? Because you're having to work with, the fire service, obviously, to do this burning. But what does that look like for an HOA as far as the experience or the roadmap to get to this place?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different approaches, right? So one is, an HOA has a shovel-ready project, or a municipality. Generally, if we're going to do burning, that's going to be at the fire department, local fire department, CAL FIRE up. They have the experience, they have the, the plan and the backing. So, we can fit right under, a normal burn plan. So they can just kind of say, hey, we need some black lining done. And we can show up and be under the direction of the burn boss and do our mission and put black line in. The other way is, as a company, we are developing our prescribed fire program. And so we can bring our own burn boss. We can plan the burn. We can work with the municipality. We can prep the unit. We can black line it, and then we can burn it. And there's a number of ways we can do it.
Now, when you say black line, you mean, just so listeners understand, you're going in this area of so many acres, and you're creating a burn all around the perimeter that leaves a black line. And then on the inside, once you have the perimeter set up, on the inside, how is that being burned? Is that Burnbot and firefighters burning the infill? How does that work?
Yeah, definitely. It really depends on who we're working for and what we're doing. But, if we're using our stack and we're doing, a Burnbot burn, really, we create the control line and we black line around the edges. Depending on the fuel type, we can do a 5-foot black line, we can do a 10-foot, we can do a 20-foot black line. And then, the next step is we actually break up the interior of the burn with more black lines. So if you envision like a checkerboard, so breaking that burn into smaller, more manageable pieces, what that does is we can burn those, in any order. We can slow the burn. And we also then have breaks built into the burn. So if conditions change, like they can often do, the wind shifts or we fall out of prescription, we can stop the burn at those interior black lines and wait for conditions to, come back into prescription. The other way we can do it is, we're big fans of the Drone Amplified's aerial ignition drone. So we can blackline the unit, prep it, and then we can go in with our aerial ignition drone and very quickly and precisely burn the interior.
Love that. And I have seen that in that. So you basically create this perimeter black line, let's call it 20 feet. And on the infill, you can dispatch a drone, and this drone will drop fireballs, if you will, onto the grasslands, and then they'll ignite. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, that's correct. And with drone amplified technology, we can really control where we put fire, the intensity of the fire, and the speed at which we burn. So in the right conditions, we can burn 90 acres in 6 minutes. Or if we need to be more precise, we can really gently work that fire down a slope, however we want to burn.
That's good stuff, man. When you think about it, like going down a slope or areas that are kind of the terrain is difficult, it does take a lot more time and manpower to get to those areas. And so if you have a drone that's dropping ignition points, I could see how that could benefit not only safety but time also, and being able to accurately and then more efficiently get that hillside to ignite.
That's correct. And at the scale of treatments needed just in California, time is a factor. And with limited burn windows, the more acres we can burn in those windows, the faster we can get towards that goal. So if we can speed up ignitions, increase safety, and get everything done, then that's a win.
Now, when you say burn windows, what are you alluding to? Like there's only a typical time frame to be able to do prescribed burns?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the issues we have is we're basically trying to thread multiple needles at the same time.
Yeah.
So you need to have the air quality district sign off on this. Your burn plan has a certain prescription. So, fuel moisture, temperature, wind, all these have to align for a burn to take place. And often that call is made, day of. One of the benefits of our system is we can actually burn outside a lot of those, restrictions. So we can go days, weeks, or even a month before the burn is going to take place and prep the unit with black lines. Then when that burn window is ready, then all they have to do is come do the ignitions on the interior and it's done.
Nice.
So we did a burn with the Central Coast PBA and Cal Fire in August, which sounds crazy to me coming from the fire service. That's not a time that not a time you would traditionally do a prescribed fire, but because of the Cal Fire unit saw the benefit of our system, and there was kind of the right conditions to do it. We were able to go in the day before the burn and put those black lines in, and I believe you have a video of that burn itself.
That's the one. Okay.
Yep. And then there was a limited window because of the availability of air resources Cal Fire had, just in case something went wrong. Yeah. So they had to do all their ignitions before 1 p.m. And because we were able to go black line this the day before, all they had to do was show up and burn the next day. And so we were able to do all 25 acres in that morning and finish the burn. We actually finished it right at the cutoff, but it all went smoothly. It all went well. And, wow. Really proud of that.
Man, there's a lot that goes into this, obviously, right? And we would, as homeowners in society, we would expect that. But I've also seen, these are portrayed on the news where a prescribed burn goes bad, and then holy smokes, now we've got craziness, right? Then the winds kick up and all these things. But does that play a part in the interest, for example, that the Forestry Service or Cal Fire has when they come to you? Like, what do they like about this experience that you're providing for them?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head, right? The worst thing that can happen, to the prescribed fire community is the prescribed fire escape and turn into a wildfire. I mean, that sets everything back. It almost villainizes prescribed fire. So any technology that can help reduce that risk and increase the amount of acres burned, I think is of interest to a lot of agencies. We've had interest from Cal Fire, the U.S. Forest Service, BLM, PG&E. We actually have done a pilot with PG&E where we did a series of tests and actually burned under their power lines. So traditionally,
Really?
you would not burn under power lines, but we can
Yeah.
actually get enough carbon and particulate in the air that the power lines can arc to the ground. So we were actually, with our system, able to prove that we can burn under power lines.
Wow. That's awesome. That's intense. Um, so let's talk about like where Burnbot is going. Like what I know when we spoke a couple of years ago, you guys were just getting off the ground. I was excited that you guys were excited. It was a really cool thing. And now, 2 years down the road, you've accomplished a few things. You've gotten money, you got insurance carriers involved. You've got all this awareness happening. What do you guys see as the next steps here in the next 3 years for Burnbot?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the technology and development around Burnbot, we're focused on our Burnbot machine, which is, we call the RX system. But, Burnbot is a lot more than just that. We're also a full stack service provider. So, we have a WUI division where we run smaller masticators in the wildland urban interface and urban interface. We have a forestry division where we do large scale heavy forestry operations. So we run everything from skid steer masticators, excavators, Prime Tech 300s, and do landscape scale treatments. On up to, we have a 10,000 acre stewardship project that we're doing in the Stanislaus National Forest, the Serral G to Z. So we even have a timber division. So,
Wow.
our mission as a company is to get more good fire on the ground and increase the pace and scale of prescribed fire. And one of the things that we realized early on is that a lot of the land in the United States, but especially California, has missed so many fire regimes that it's actually not even feasible to put prescribed fire on the ground. They're so overgrown and mismanaged. So we have, we do everything from, shaded fuel breaks, landscape scale treatments. And the reason for that is to prep the land so we can come back and put good fire on the ground as a maintenance treatment.
Now let's rewind a little bit. You said you guys have masticators. I don't know that our listeners know what that is, but you need to Google it. It is legit, man. This type of equipment, it's like, let's go, man. Like this is the kind of stuff that as guys we want to go out there and do and handle. But can you describe what a masticator does?
Yeah. So in areas that are overgrown with brush, blackberry, in the forest, you see, overgrown with small trees. We can go in with a masticator, which basically chews up the fuel. So we're basically shredding and chipping the fuel and putting it back into the ground a lot of times. And so what we're able to do is clear that forest back to where it should be, per prescription. So sometimes we're clearing brush around a house and we're just creating that sort of park-like environment. So we're taking, a hillside of Manzanita, and we can take that and create a healthy environment that, if a fire comes, is just going to drop to the ground or go out. Or we can take, a overgrown forest and remove all the stuff that fire traditionally would have removed if we allowed it to burn with its, usual cadence. So yeah, we're basically, instead of being able to do prescribed fire, which is the preferred treatment,
right,
we can come in and mimic what that would have been doing for, the last 100, 200 years.
Got it. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And I think, when I think about, a property owner or an HOA that has vegetation around the perimeter, being involved with IBHS in Firewise communities, in NFPA standards, there are distance. There's for the vegetation, there are suggested distances between vegetation that will minimize wildfire exposure. And so for large properties, I'm like, you know what, this would be really cool for you guys to go in there use your masticator to do what it has to do and really create that environment without having to have so much manpower involved and time to make that happen. Wow. So how did you guys get into that aspect of it? Was it just a result of what you were finding some of the challenges to be with Burnbot that got you into this? Or did you guys simultaneously decide we're going to get into this and provide this type of service also?
Yeah, a little of everything.
Okay.
So, in looking at the problem, it's one thing to be able to go in and burn, but we want to be a full stack solution. So we have our technology that we develop in field, but we also are pulling the best of forestry technology into our stack. Because every acre, every home is different, right? Every project needs a different set of tools. It's kind of cliche to say, but there's no silver bullet in this issue, right? No one technology, no one service is going to solve this problem. So for us, it was the logical step to create a system of technologies that can be deployed a la carte, all at once, to sort of handle any project that needs to be done. And with that, we work just with our RMTs, which are remote mastication teams. So one of the things we do is we use very lightweight, small masticators that have a small footprint. So we can use those, because our operators are outside the cab and walking with it, we can cut right along houses, right along fences, in sensitive areas. And really what we're doing is we're taking some of the stuff from the fire community and pulling that into the fuel mitigation aspect. And so, what we do is we bring a lot of ex-wildland firefighters into the mix, and they become our operators, and we run those masticators kind of like a hand crew would operate.
Yeah.
So we're basically mechanizing the workforce. And what we do is we run 2 masticators and 3 personnel, and we're able to, see some real efficiency gains. So we did a project in San Rafael with San Rafael Fire Department where they had a fuel break within the community that was 40 acres. On one side, there was 20 acres that was done by traditional hand crew, and it took them 5 weeks. And on the other 20 acres, it took my 3-person team 5 days.
Wow. So significant, man. Now, Simon, this is exciting stuff. And I think just like most things, getting the word out and getting is one aspect of it. Number 2, once you get the word out, it's consistent. We have to continue doing that. But when you get people to begin to trust you and to experiment and do pilot programs, that's another phase of putting it into action. For you guys, how many states are you guys involved with? Is it throughout the whole U.S., or are you specific to a state or two, or how's that working out for you guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are a fast-growing company. So currently we're in the Bay Area, the Sonoma, Napa area, Santa Rosa, Placerville is kind of where we handle the Sierras from. That's where our forestry division is, and our WUI. We're in Redding, and then Southern Oregon. So we're kind of handling from Roseburg all the way south to sort of the Fresno line. And then we have some sort of forward operating bases in San Bernardino, LA area.
Okay.
So we're sort of expanding our logistical footprint as work comes.
Yeah. Now, I think you guys are in the right locations because this is where there's so much activity. Now, this last year was relatively low for wildfires, ignitions. Well, ignitions maybe not. I'll have to do some research on that. But with the amount of acres that were burned, it was relatively low in comparison to the previous years. Do you guys? And this is a perfect time, right, for companies like yours and ours to be able to do a lot of this mitigation efforts. I think too often as a end user, as a customer, as a homeowner, we say, oh, there was no wildfire season this year and nothing to worry about. That's concerning to me, because the reality is it's a matter of time. It's going to happen. And this is when it feels like the season is low or slow or non-existent. This is the time to do the work, man, because you can almost see what's going to be coming, which is craziness. And those that are prepared are going to have the better outcomes. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, definitely within our company, we feel this sense of urgency, as I'm sure you do, is like, the problem is here now. Like, how do we scale to meet it? Because, really, we know what needs to be done to solve this. Someone knows what acres need to be treated across the whole United States, right? It's not a what, it's a scale problem. How do we scale to do this? I mean, yeah, the rhetoric of like, oh, fire season's going away, wildfires are going away. I mean, we hear that. It's like, it only takes a year to forget,
exactly
what we've been through. So, for us, our sort of battle cry, if you will, is, mitigation is the best suppression.
Boom.
So, we're fixing the airplane before it crashes, not after.
Yeah.
And so, with that, it is a race, right? And we feel it every day. It's like, come on, like, let us out there, let us go treat these acres, let us in. And, really, there's a lot of friction, as I'm sure you see, to actually getting to do the work. I mean, we are a for-profit company, so we do need to keep the lights on, but our overarching mission is to treat as many acres as possible. So yeah, it is the time, and for us, we're staffed up with, about 75% ex-wildland firefighters, and then the rest are forestry professionals, loggers, things like that. And, we're bringing those two cultures together and distilling the best of them and using that as like a function to fight fire before the fire starts.
That's awesome. And, I for our listeners, they're from a wide spectrum, from realtors to insurance brokers to wildland firefighters to CAL FIRE to forestry service. Like, it's pretty wide. And what's really cool is that hopefully what I find is, it's funny because 2 years ago we were having a similar conversation about, man, how do we get everyone to cooperate? Because let's get the word out. There are certain things that really could be done, and then the red tape shows up. And you're like, seriously, like what? And so it's interesting because the key is continue to get the word out. And I think through platforms like this with All Things Wildfire, I want to bring people in here that have some really, really good ideas that can help. And then through just getting the ideas out, the collaboration of the listeners, man, there's some smart people, brother. There's some smart people listening in, and they could really begin to thinking, okay, how can I get, Burnbot and Simon's team involved in this particular project? And that's my hope, is that, as we get together and just collaborate, like something could happen where there's one connection that meets another connection, and then boom, there's an opportunity, and then we can move swiftly to try and minimize this massive exposure that we have, especially here in California, in neighboring states as well. But that's my hope through things like this, to be able to get the word out and have people begin to connect the dots. Simon, as we get ready to close here, is there any message that you want to leave the listeners with regards to Burnbot or the different services that you guys provide?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration is key, and you talk about red tape, there is this sort of friction between the practitioners and technology, right? Technology can almost be this dirty word. And, there's all sorts of different rhetorics around that. But, the thing is that, we're not here to replace jobs. In fact, we're hiring like crazy. So
wow.
If there's any professionals out there looking for work, give us a call. But our goal is to amplify that workforce and reduce that red tape friction. So our goal is to hire 100 times more folks and make them able to do 100 times more work. Because the scale of this problem just in California, let alone the US and the world, is so big. I mean, there's enough work to go around. So the more that we work together and the less we compete, I think the better chance we have of surviving this sort of age of these large fires. So
well said. And I think the overarching message is something that you've already stated, which is there is no one silver bullet that's going to take care of everything. And I think that's where the practitioners of different things that we do to help in mitigation services can really come together and just begin to share best practices. This is what's happening here at the ground level of homeowner, or this is what's happening with aerial, right? And this is what's happening, with hillsides, and what we can do at a massive scale when you're dealing with a large amount of acres. And I think everyone coming together and sharing these ideas and best practices really allows us to collaborate and be one, right? Versus being scattered. I think that's the thing that's so confusing to people is, and you got some people out here right now that are just trying to sell like snake oil, man. And it's kind of stinks, man. But I guess it comes with the process, right? But as an HOA or as a homeowner or even CAL FIRE, the Forestry Service, they're probably bombarded with different ideas and different things. And they have to vet this stuff too, right? As a homeowner, we have to vet, okay, hold on a second. That thing that they're talking about, does that make sense? This makes sense. But I think the more that we collaborate together, the companies that really have the best in mind for the homeowner, like you said, you're a for-profit company, but overall, like, you want to help minimize the amount of impact the wildfire has for people. For me, being in the insurance restoration service, I've seen the effects of wildfire. I've dealt with people. We've, sifted through their rubble. It's painful, man. And life changes absolutely dramatically after an experience like that. And so, man, if you could help one homeowner, if you could help one HOA, if you could help anyone to avoid some of this stuff, that's why we're all here, man. There's being able to collaborate together is going to be the key for us to really show everyone we can all work together. We have the same mission in mind to help reduce the exposure of wildfire and the disaster that it brings to the table. So,
absolutely.
Awesome. All right, brother. Well, thank you again, man, for jumping on the show. Great to see you again. Great talking to you. Glad to hear the progress you guys are making, and wish you continued success, brother.
Hey, same to you. Happy 2024.
Let's go, baby. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of All Things Wildfire. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to our show and follow us on social media to stay up to date on all things wildfire. And as always, thanks for listening.